My jumping off point for today's sermon was a pair of quotes I saw on Facebook, of all places. The first was a rather cheery cartoon that suggested that the pain and suffering of 2020 was very much the result of, quote, stupid human decisions and bad luck, and that if we don't make a change, 2021 will be no different. The second, and actually really very much related, quote, came from Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who asked in his year-end address back in 2013, quote, can we truly have a new year if there isn't a new me, a new us? I know a lot of us are tiptoeing around this idea of a new year, kind of waiting for the penny to drop. And after all, 2020 opened so promisingly. Maybe we don't want to jinx it this year. Yeah, if that's the case, I feel you. But barring natural calamity and catastrophic lack of leadership, and in the spirit of fortune favoring the bold, I think maybe we might be able to imagine ourselves anew. Here we are in the middle of the 12 days of Christmas, still. With Epiphany, though, right around the corner. Epiphany. It's a really kind of a cool name for a holiday, but it's the time when the Magi appeared. And the holiday is asking us to have that same kind of epiphany, the time when we see things differently, when we change, when we can make a commitment to change, to tell a new story. I'm reminded rather often, actually, of Thomas King's 2003 book, The Truth About Stories. Those of you keeping track will no doubt remember that I've mentioned this book before. Out of the 1.4 million books that I've acquired since beginning seminary, this book, written by a Native American writer and activist, remains one of my favorites. What really left a mark was the author's suggestion that the stories we tell about ourselves, our actions, our beliefs, these are, in some fundamental way, our identity. He frames each of his stories more or less the same way, like this. There is a story that I know. It's about the earth and how it floats in space on the back of a turtle. I've heard this story many times, and each time someone tells the story, it changes. Sometimes the change is simply in the voice of the storyteller. Sometimes the change is in the details. But in all the tellings of all the tellers, the world never leaves the turtle's back, and the turtle never swims away. One time, a young girl in the audience asked about the turtle and the earth. If the earth was on the back of a turtle, what was below the turtle? Another turtle, the storyteller told her. And below that turtle, another turtle. And below that turtle, why, another turtle. The girl began to laugh, enjoying the game, I imagine. So, how many turtles are there? The storyteller shrugged. No one knows for sure, he told her, but it's turtles all the way down. The truth about stories is that that's all we are. I love that story, but I want to take a moment and hear that last sentence again. The truth about stories is that that is all we are. It's pretty good, right? I like that one. You've heard me use that line before. So let me close the loop. because with that as the opening, it's how Mr. King ends each essay. That's where things kind of get real. He writes, "The story I just told you, it's yours. Do with it what you will. Tell it to your friends, forget it, but don't say in the years to come that you would have lived your life differently if only you had heard it. You've heard it now." And this is where I want to go with today's sermon. I want to talk about stories, our stories, the stories of our lives. And now for the interactive portion of today's message, I'm going to remove the spotlight for a moment. And what I want you to do is to go up, it's this way, go up this way, go there, that way, to the corner of your Zoom window and click the button that says View. And I want you to pull that down to Gallery. You'll know it's right, wherever it is on your screen. You'll know it's right because the screen's going to fill up with a ton of little boxes like we're contestants on a game show. Now, looking at those faces, your community, and in the spirit of our friend, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III of Trinity Church here in Chicago, I want you to turn to your neighbor. Yes, that neighbor. No, really, turn. You know I can see you, right? All right. Now, say to your neighbor, neighbor.
Neighbor.
Oh, neighbor.
Neighbor, oh, neighbor.
There you go. That'll work.
Hey, neighbor.
Neighbor, oh, neighbor.
We get to write.
We get to write.
We get to
We
write
get to write
The stories of our lives.
the
stories
stories
of our
of
lives.
our lives.
Hot diggity, that worked. All right. Thank you. Amen. Let's go back to a mute there, Jeff. Brilliant. Yes, we get to write the stories of our lives. I wanted us all to just take a moment and say that out loud today of all days. With all of the ongoing struggles against injustice and oppression, with all of the hate and fear we hear in the news, with all of the challenges of pandemic life and pandemic work and pandemic family, it's worth remembering that our lives and the way we live them are the text of our own personal resistance, our testament to resilience, our manifesto against cynicism and despair. In the end, our stories are all we have. How we write them matters. So while I have you captive this morning, I want to do a bit of creative visualization. I know you're so excited. But what I want you to do is to imagine that we are the author of the novel that is our life. Better still, imagine our doings as the words and phrases, the anecdotes and the parables, the story arcs and the plot devices of that novel. Got it? Good. Now, here's where things get interesting. I want us to imagine living our lives in such a way that this novel we're writing is one we would recommend to friends. Yeah. Ouch. Living is one thing. Living in such a way that your life is a story someone else might find worth reading, that's different. Now, this isn't my idea. I borrowed it from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche from his book, Twilight of the Idols, where he described the meaning of life as a life lived with integrity and perfect authenticity. Authenticity, that aligning of action with belief and desire, regardless, perhaps even heedless, of pressure or influence. For Nietzsche, your life was a canvas. Authenticity was your paint, and it was making art out of authenticity that would make your life compelling to others. Ultimately, We should look to no role models, gather no advice from friends, seek no guidance from heroes. Instead, we should strike a path as unique as we are, and only then will our work, our life's work, the work that is our life, only then will it be truly meaningful. You might say that Nietzsche had a flair for the dramatic, and yet he is provocative. And while we could explore the life is art debate some other day, the idea that our lives are a novel that we are supposed to write, I think that's one worth considering every day. Because if we let our culture, our careers, and the general busyness of our regular and irregular lives distract us from our one true job, the job of living our lives, then we're in trouble. We're in trouble because who else is going to do that job for us? Even now, even with isolation and stay-at-home recommendations, we are still all loaded up, aren't we? We reflexively overfill every hour. Our brimming days, a slippery, seamless slide into weeks, months, and years. And the next thing we know, we are saying to each other, wow, where has the time gone? And writing the script of an intentional life, one full of things we value, like love, service, spirituality, connection, justice. Well, all that got put on a wish list, something that was handed off to a ghostwriter years ago. I'm reminded of what my old friend Ferris Bueller once taught me. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Can I confess something? That was my fear, my FOMO, if you will, my fear of missing out. 5 years ago, I was successful. I was a corporate executive. I led large teams. I talked CEOs out of millions of dollars. I had bonus checks. I was also working an undetermined number of hours a week. I had conference calls starting at 7 a.m. I was answering email at midnight on Sundays. I was traveling every week. I spent more time with my boss than my wife, more time with my clients than my kids. And while I am genuinely baffled as to how any of that happened to a guy who once dreamed of being a horror fiction writer, true story, I am reminded of John Lennon, who said, life was what happened when you're making other plans. 25 years ago, I had plans. I didn't mean to drop those plans. I had reasons. I was broke. I needed a job. I made what I hoped was the best decision at that time, each time, from the choices that I felt I had available to me. And in between, life happened. But I wonder, what would have happened to my story if someone had stopped me in all of my busyness, looked me in the eye like I am looking at you this morning, and said to me, it doesn't have to be this way. If you're like me, you look into the faces of the kids in the congregation and imagine who they might one day be. I'm pretty sure we all do this with kids at one time or another. The potential they represent can be overwhelming. But when was the last time you looked into the mirror and saw that same potential? When you last asked yourself, am I the person that I imagined? And if I'm not, when am I going to take up that project? When am I going to start that chapter? Now, truth is, none of us come to, or better still, come back to a project like this from scratch. We've all lived a bit, regardless of exactly how old we were when this morning found us. Metaphorically speaking, the novel that is our life has at least a few pages already filled in with furious scribbling. And that's okay. In fact, that's exactly right. But what I want us to do with this next page is to see if perhaps for the first time in a long time, that what gets put down is at least in some measure still up to us. Yeah, certain things need to be there. Yeah, some of us will have more pages to work with. All that is true. And as the author of our stories, we get to decide the shape of at least some of that story. I should pause here and note that change is often easier said than done. Trapped as I was in my professional life, I had no idea what else I could do, much less what I wanted to do. For many, many years, change was unimaginable. I suppose you could say I had writer's block. Many of you may feel the same way too. So, if you are one of those aspiring writers, imagining that next page with some uncertainty, some trepidation, some now what? For you today, I'd like to offer up a particular literary device, the plot twist. You know what I'm talking about, right? The story is going along one day, and next thing you know, boom, something surprising happens. As the author of the story that is our life, this is where we get to throw our future readers a curveball, just to keep them on their toes, as it were, just to keep them guessing. Again, if you're like me and need some inspiration, it turns out that our Google overlords can be very helpful with some real-life examples of plot twists. Here is a selection offered up for your collective consideration and inspiration. Did you know that Walt Disney was fired from his job in 1919 because, quote, he lacked imagination? Did you know that Stan Lee of Marvel Comics published his first comic book at age 39? Julia Child published her first cookbook when she was 50. She began her PBS cooking show when she was 51. Frances Woofenden has won over 100 medals in competitive water skiing, but she started water skiing when she was 50. Giorgio Armani started designing clothes after his 60th birthday. Laura Ingalls Wilder published her first book, Little House in the Big Woods, at 65. Grandma Moses started her painting career at 76. Gladys Burrell ran her first marathon, which means many more after that, but her first one at 86. Nola Oakes completed her bachelor's degree at 95 and then went on to complete her master's at 98. And my favorite, Georgina Harwood. She celebrated her 100th birthday by skydiving and then followed that up with a swim with great white sharks. Can you even imagine what that birthday invitation would have looked like? If you twist my arm, I will confess that the younger me took the idea of plot lines in the write my life as a novel idea maybe a tad too seriously. For example, one of my old journals actually has the line, quote, "I want to write my deeds in the book of life with words of fire." Look, all I can say in my defense is that there are worse inspirations than The Lord of the Rings. But that does bring me to an important point. Plot twists don't have to be life-threatening to be good. The point is to shake our stories up, not require a dance with a Nazgul or star in a real-life version of Sharknado. Let me put it this way. Just because our lives are not fantastical in scope does not mean that our stories are less worthy. To quote the wizard Gandalf the Grey, some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that is not what I have found. I found it is the small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. Personally, I take great comfort in these words. Given some of my recent life choices, I will probably never be rich. This is a shame because I'd be an excellent rich person. But please believe me when I say that no one was more surprised than I was when I finally realized that being me was more important than being rich or successful. I had it wrong. And it literally took me decades to figure that out. I had to discover that my greatest joy came from those around me. That rather fundamental realization is what led to being here with you this morning and telling you at least some of the things I wish someone had told me. No, I won't be rich. And no, there will be no Mount Doom or, quote, words of fire for me. Instead, I got a different sort of gift, a chance to live a different sort of life. As we turn to the close, I want to tell you about another of my own roadblocks, something that stalled me for years. And it's something I suspect may be a roadblock for some of you, especially if you're a typical UU, right? Now sitting here rethinking this next part of your story. So it's this. It turns out there really is no such thing as a perfect story. No perfect stories. There are a lot of reasons why this is, but one of the main reasons, it is just a fact that there will always be more to do, more to say, more to learn, and more to explore. There will never be enough pages. The possibilities of life are endless, and the crime that is the human condition is that we are only given just so much time with no sequels and no do-overs. What I take from this is that mistakes have to happen. Like many characters in my favorite books, I am gonna get it wrong. We are all gonna get it wrong. We simply don't have time to get it perfect. And just as tragically, and with all due apologies to Nietzsche, our story of a life lived with integrity and meaning will probably never hit perfect authenticity. And you know what? So what? The sooner we realize that mistakes not only happen, but are exactly what makes our lives interesting, what make our stories human, then maybe the sooner we can take a risk that creates, a risk that changes things, a cliffhanger that sets up our next chapter. So in that spirit, I invite you to consider this. We are saved from perfection. Wait, I'm ordained, so I can do better than that. Please join me in the attitude of prayer. By the power invested in me on this day, and by the spirit of life and love, and in accordance with natural law and human nature, I hereby absolve you, my friends and neighbors. I absolve you of the sin of perfection. Ego te absolvo. There. Now you are absolutely free to make your plot twists really interesting. My friends, change is an act of creation. We may not be God, but our lives, our stories, those are ours to write. We get to write the stories of our lives. Yes, that means you and you and you, all of us. And this new year, with a renewed sense of hope and possibility for a post-pandemic world, I want to invite you all. I want to invite you to imagine the pen in your hands or your fingers floating above the keys. Feel that empty page. Your doings will be the words and phrases, the anecdotes and the parables, the story arcs and the plot devices of the story you have yet to write. We are our stories. We are those turtles, we human beings. We are stories all the way down. Remember Nietzsche, a meaningful life is a novel that you'd recommend to a friend. That idea is yours now. Write it down, tell it to friends, live it boldly or forget it entirely. Do with it what you will, but don't say in the years to come that you would have lived your life differently if only you had heard it. You have heard it now. Because the truth about stories is that that's all we are. Happy New Year and Happy New You. Amen.